I sat in my car for 6 hours straight, parked across from that hotel, my hands frozen on the wheel long after the engine had gone cold. My husband walked through those doors at 9 that night with his hand resting on the small of another woman's back, laughing at something she'd said, like he didn't have a wife waiting up for him 20 minutes away. I didn't honk. I didn't get out. I just watched the automatic doors close behind them and felt something in my chest go very still, the way a room goes still right before a storm hits. I told myself there had to be an explanation, some version of this that didn't mean what it looked like. A work thing. A misunderstanding. I kept waiting for my mind to hand me an excuse I could actually believe. And it never came. Instead, I sat there running through every late night over the past 2 months. Every time Corey said he was meeting a contractor after hours. Every charge on that shared card I'd told myself not to think too hard about. None of it had made sense on its own. Together, watching him vanish into that lobby, it made perfect sense. Around midnight, my eyes burned from staring at the same stretch of glass doors. But I didn't leave. I needed this to be real before I let myself react to it. Because the version of me that screamed in a parking lot wouldn't be the version who walked away with anything intact. So I stayed, watching that entrance like it held the only truth that mattered. And somewhere around 2 in the morning, the sadness in my chest cooled into something sharper and steadier. I wasn't going to be the woman who cried in this parking lot and forgave him by breakfast. Whatever I decided before sunrise was going to decide everything that came after it. And for the first time all night, I felt completely certain about what that decision would be. At 5 in the morning, my phone lit up on the passenger seat, and I already knew before I picked it up that it would be Corey. Working through the night with the supplier, he'd written, "Sorry, don't wait up." I read it twice. Sitting 50 feet from the hotel, he was supposedly nowhere near. And something in me went very calm. The same calm that comes right before you stop asking questions you already know the answer to. I didn't call him screaming. I didn't type out everything I'd seen. I just typed back 4 words. "Come down. We need to talk." And hit send before I could talk myself out of it. Then I got out of the car and stood beside it in the cold morning air, arms crossed, watching that lobby the way I'd been watching it for hours, except now I wasn't hiding. A few minutes later, the doors opened, and Corey walked out still in yesterday's clothes. His hair a mess, and the moment his eyes found me standing there, his whole face changed, like a man realizing the ground under him wasn't where he'd left it. "Dana, what are you doing here?" he said, his voice cracking somewhere between confusion and panic. And I watched him glance back at the doors like he was hoping she'd stayed inside. I didn't answer his question. I just looked at him standing there in that half-lit parking lot and asked my own, "How long has this been going on?" "Corey." He opened his mouth like he was going to deny it, then closed it again. Because there was nothing left to deny with me standing 20 feet from the exact place he'd told me he wasn't. For the first time since I'd known him, he had no explanation ready, and the silence between us said more than anything he could have made up on the spot. What Corey didn't know standing there in that parking lot was that this moment had been building for weeks, not hours. I wasn't a woman who acted on impulse, and I needed him to understand that before either of us said another word. The late nights that started stacking up 3 and 4 times a week. The charges on our shared card for a hotel 2 towns over that I'd told myself might be a work expense. The perfume on his collar that didn't match anything I owned or anything Whitney's name had ever been attached to until I started paying attention. Every piece had been sitting there in plain sight, and once I stopped explaining it away, it all lined up on its own. 2 weeks before that morning, I had already sat across from a family law attorney named Preston in his office downtown, laying out everything I'd noticed and asking him plainly what my options were. I hadn't been certain yet that I'd need a lawyer. I just knew I needed to stop being the last person to understand my own life. Preston had walked me through what to gather and what not to touch, and by the time I left his office, I had a folder started. Dates and charges and screenshots. Organize the way you organize something you hope you'll never actually need. Standing in that parking lot now, I realized I hadn't needed hope. I reached into my bag and pulled the folder out. Papers I'd already had drawn up and reviewed. Ready for exactly this moment, even though some part of me had prayed I'd never have to use them. I set it flat on the hood of my car between us. The metal still cold under my palm from 6 hours of sitting untouched in that lot. Corey looked down at it like he already understood what it was before I said a word. And for the first time that morning, I watched something other than panic cross his face. It was the look of a man realizing the woman in front of him wasn't the one he thought he'd left waiting at home. Corey stared at the folder like it was something that might bite him if he touched it. And when he finally spoke, his voice had dropped into that soft, pleading register I recognized from every argument we'd ever half won. "Dana, come on. This is insane," he said. "We can talk about this at home. We don't have to do this here in a parking lot." I kept my hand flat on the folder and told him we weren't doing this at home, because home was exactly where he'd lied to me every night this had been going on. "This isn't a conversation. Corey," I said, "this is you signing your name." He opened it anyway, flipping through pages he clearly hadn't expected to exist yet, and I watched the last of his composure slide off his face. "You had this drawn up already," he said, more to himself than to me. Like the sight of Preston's letterhead was somehow more shocking than the woman he'd left standing in that lobby. "It was one mistake," he tried next, his voice climbing. "We built 8 years together. You're really going to throw that away over one night?" I almost laughed at that, standing there in the cold with 6 hours of watching him lie still fresh in my body. "One night," I repeated. "Corey, I sat in a parking lot and watched you walk into that hotel with her. This wasn't one night. This was every late meeting, every excuse, every charge I let myself believe was nothing." He tried once more, softer this time, reaching for my arm before pulling back when he saw my face. "Please, we can fix this. I'll end it with her today. Just give me another chance. I'm not signing because I'm angry." I told him, "I'm signing because you finally showed me exactly who you are. And for once, I actually believe it." The sun was coming up behind the hotel by then, throwing long light across the lot. And Corey looked down at that folder one last time before he picked up the pen from where I'd left it on the hood. His hand shook through the first signature. It was steadier by the last. I called my friend Renee that same morning, still sitting in my car outside the courthouse parking structure where I'd gone straight from that hotel lot. And I told her everything in one long breath before I could talk myself into softening any of it. She didn't gasp and she didn't ask if I was sure. She just asked one steady question. "Do you actually know who she is?" And I realized I didn't. Not really. Nothing beyond a name I'd seen once on a receipt I wasn't supposed to look at. Renee worked the front desk at the clinic with me, but her husband ran a crew for one of the same suppliers Corey's store used every week. And within an hour, she had a name for me to start looking into beyond just Whitney. What I learned over the next few days didn't excuse anything, but it did fill in the shape of an actual person instead of a stereotype I'd built out of anger. Whitney had run a small boutique 2 years earlier that folded fast, left her holding a lease she couldn't get out of, and a stack of vendor debt she was still climbing out from under when she started calling on Corey's store as a supplier rep. A former coworker of hers, someone Renee knew through a shared gym, mentioned that Whitney had told people at work she felt like she was finally catching a break with someone steady, someone who paid attention and picked up the tab without ever being asked twice. Hearing all of that didn't make me feel sorry for her exactly, but it did something else entirely. It took away the easy story, where she was simply a woman who wanted what was mine. She was a woman who saw an opening and walked straight through it, fully aware of what she was doing and who it would hurt on the other side. Corey hadn't been targeted by some scheming stranger who tricked him into anything. He'd been an answer to someone else's problem, and he'd said yes to that role without giving a single thought to what it would eventually cost either of us. I went back to Preston's office 3 days after the signing in that parking lot. this time to sit down and actually understand what came next, instead of just reacting to what had already happened. He had the folder from our first meeting still on his desk, thicker now with everything I'd added since the transfers, the hotel receipts, the messages I'd finally stopped pretending not to see. He looked through the new pages slowly, then set them down and looked at me the way a man looks at someone he's about to tell something important. "You understand North Carolina doesn't split things 50-50, he said. "We're an equitable distribution state, which means a judge looks at what's fair given everything that happened in the marriage, not just what's on paper." I asked him what that actually meant for me. Sitting there with 8 years of a life I'd built, folded into one manila folder, it means what Corey did matters here in a way it wouldn't in some other states. Preston said, "This kind of documented misconduct, the hotel charges, the pattern of deception, can absolutely factor into how the court divides what you two have and how alimony gets decided going forward." I sat with that for a moment, watching him tap the edge of the folder like he was underlining the point without needing more words for it. "So, the more I can show, the stronger this gets," I said, and he nodded once. Direct as ever. "Exactly. And from what you've brought me today, you've already built a stronger case than most people walk in with." I asked him honestly if that meant Corey would end up losing most of what we'd built together. And Preston chose his words carefully, telling me he couldn't promise numbers, but that a judge weighing years of documented misconduct against a marriage this length would very likely land somewhere far from an even split. I left his office that afternoon with something steadier than anger settling into my chest. The quiet certainty that the truth I'd sat in a cold parking lot to find was now doing exactly what I needed it to do. Word moved through town faster than the paperwork did. Asheville isn't a big city when it comes to the building trade. Everyone at that store buys from the same 3 suppliers and drinks at the same 2 bars after close. And within a week, 2 of Corey's longtime customers had quietly taken their accounts to the shop 2 exits down. One of them, a contractor Corey had worked with for years, told a mutual friend flat out that he didn't want his name near a business where the manager couldn't keep his own house in order. That single sentence made its way back to me within days, and it landed exactly the way that kind of thing does in a small trade community. Fast and permanent. Whitney lost more than Corey did in some ways, and lost it faster. The distributor she worked for got wind of the situation through the same grapevine, and since her territory overlapped directly with Corey's store, her manager flagged it as a conflict of interest that put ongoing contracts at risk. She was reassigned out of the territory within 2 weeks, and I heard through Renee that the reassignment was really just a quiet way of pushing her out the door before the quarter ended. Whatever she thought she was building with Corey, it cost her the one thing that had been steady before he ever showed up in her life. Preston filed the equitable distribution claim with the documented misconduct attached as part of the record, and he told me plainly that given the pattern we'd shown, a judge was very likely to weigh it heavily against Corey when the final numbers came down. Corey, for his part, tried calling twice in that stretch, and both times I let it ring through to voicemail without listening to either message. Everything he thought he'd built quietly on the side had come apart at nearly the same speed he'd built it. The store's reputation cracking, the relationship with Whitney gone within a month, and a legal case stacked against him that he had no real answer for. None of it happened because I screamed in that parking lot. It happened because I didn't have to. The divorce finalized on a quiet Thursday, and I signed the last page in Preston's office without any of the drama I once thought a moment like that would carry. What I felt instead was space. Real space. The kind that opens up once you stop bracing for the next lie. Corey's name came up less and less after that, mostly through people who still shopped at his store or ran into him around town. And each time, it felt a little more like hearing about someone I used to know rather than someone I'd built a life with. I moved out toward the Blue Ridge that same summer, close enough to the trailheads that I could be on a ridgeline before most people finished their coffee. I picked hiking back up almost immediately, the thing I'd let slide year after year, while I was busy managing someone else's excuses. And within a few months, I was leading weekend groups up some of the same trails I used to walk alone as a teenager. Renee drove up more than once to hike with me, and she never brought up Corey unless I did first. She just laced up her boots and let the trail do whatever talking needed doing. News reached me the way it always does in a town that size. Corey was still trying to rebuild some version of his reputation at the store. Working harder than he ever had to convince longtime customers he was worth trusting again. Whitney had left the area altogether, not long after losing her territory, and nobody seemed to know exactly where she'd landed, or particularly cared to find out. As for me, I found something out here on these ridgelines I hadn't felt in years. Steady ground under my own 2 feet. If you're listening tonight from your own version of that parking lot, I hope you know that walking away with your eyes open isn't losing anything. It's the first step toward finding a life that's actually yours.